Most love stories are not between two people at all. They are negotiations between a person and their own judgment. If that sounds unsettling, stay with me. By the end, you'll have a way to tell calmly and cleanly whether what you're feeling is love that can last or an illusion that will ask you to pay later with interest. And I'll give you a small experiment you can run tonight that will answer more honestly than your adrenaline ever has. Before we begin, a humane boundary. What follows is educational philosophy, not personal instruction, not therapy, not a prescription for your specific life. I will speak in clear terms, and I will ask you questions, but the responsibility to weigh, adapt, or discard rests with you. The Stoics were never against love. They were against self-deception. Why talk about this now? Because our age makes projection cheap and recognition expensive. We are surrounded by mirrors that pretend to be windows, timelines, highlight reels, short clips with a soundtrack, and the speed with which we infer, idealize, and attach has outpaced our training in attention. We swipe, we infer, we project. Then we wake, we resent, we repeat. Ancient Stoicism offers an antidote that is not antique. Under the daily noise sits a very simple architecture. Impressions arrive, judgments assent or refuse, actions follow, outcomes teach. Where love is concerned, the first two steps, impression and assent, decide almost everything, yet we rush past them as if a feeling were already a fact. The modern psychology you may have heard from the Jungian tradition about the way we cast inner images on outer people rhymes with a very old Stoic warning: do not confuse what something is with what it is in your mind. The Greeks called the first movement a fantasia, an appearance, a seeming. It may be accurate, it may be a trick of light. The art is in what you do next. If you remember nothing else today, hold this distinction. There is the person in front of you with their character, their history, their habits, and there is the figure your mind constructs, a composite of hope, memory, hunger, fear, and the gleam of possibility. Both are real experiences for you. Only one exists outside your skull. It is not cynical to say this. It is the first affection ode to love, clear seeing, so that what you choose, you truly choose, and what you promise, you can keep. You've heard a version of the claim that people fall for you because you represent something they lack, or because you awaken a pattern they have long carried within. From a Stoic perch, that translates to this: attraction often begins either as appetite for a virtue one has not yet cultivated, or as assent to a familiar story one has not yet examined. In the first case, you meet someone disciplined and your own unruly habits feel a little less inevitable. In the second, you meet someone who fits the blueprint your upbringing engraved, and your body says, home, even if the house is built on sand. The Stoics don't ask you to forbid either pull. They ask you to look at it with good eyes and a steady hand. Consider a young attorney we'll call Elena. She is brilliant and exhausted, a worker of late nights and perfect margins, and she has built her worth on being indestructible. At a fundraiser, she meets a musician whose calendar seems to have holes in it where the sun can pass. He is not lazy, he is light. His laughter doesn't apologize. Elena, who must schedule her lunches, feels in his presence the permission to breathe. She tells herself it is chemistry. In truth, it is also a compliment her own soul is paying to a missing practice. The musician starts to sleep over. At first, they do not fight. because they perform. She performs competence. He performs warmth. Months later, her need for order and his love of improvisation turn from the stage to the kitchen, and then to the calendar, and then to cash. Each calls the other by a harsher name. She is rigid, he is irresponsible. What changed? Nothing essential. An impression was mistaken for the thing itself. Elena didn't need him to complete her. She needed to befriend lightness within herself so that when she loved him, she loved him. Not the sticking plaster he provided over her unexamined fear that rest equals worthlessness. The downfall was preventable. Had she paused early to ask, not, what do I get from him, but what part of me is waking in his presence, and how can I grow it on my own timetable, the same relationship might have become gentler, because it would not be asked to carry a job description it could never fulfill. Stoicism is not the enemy of romance. It is the enemy of confusion. Error begins when we make a second mistake on top of the first. Not only do we confuse the impression with the person, we outsource our own unfinished training to them. When we ask the other to stand in for a faculty we refuse to build, we recruit them as a prosthetic. Then we resent them when they get heavy. You can love someone's discipline and let it inspire your training. But if you love them to avoid training, you have turned them into a tool. Tools break under that. There is a second pattern of attachment that owes more to narrative than to virtue. Let me tell you about Jonas, a composite of many real people who spent their 20s trying to find, as he put it, the one. Jonas grew up with a parent whose love was precise, conditional, and intermittent in expression. Attention came in spikes, intense, then absent. Somewhere deep in his nervous system, a blueprint formed. Love equals longing, and longing equals worth. In college, he dated a woman who was consistently available, and he felt bored. He said she lacked spark. What she lacked, in fact, was the flavor of deprivation he had learned to call passion. Later, he met someone mercurial, and he came alive. Not because she was fundamentally more compatible, but because the rhythm of her attention matched the beat of his blueprint. He called it destiny. His friends called it drama. The Stoic question is simpler. Are you drawn to a person or to a pattern? Patterns feel like home even when they are haunted. This is where a modern Jungian description, inner images of the masculine or feminine that live within us, can be useful if handled with care. You carry within you shapes inherited from early relationships and culture. They are not destiny, they are defaults. The Stoics would say, you are not required to assent to every appearance that arrives. The appearance may be compelling, laced with biology and story. What grants it power is your judgment. Epictetus taught students to put a space between the knock on the door and the hand on the handle. An impression arrives. Here is someone who feels like you have known them forever. Before you fling the door open, examine the stamp on the letter. Does this feel like familiarity because their character resembles your values, or because their volatility resembles your past? The body alone cannot tell you. You must ask with reason and with time. What then is the practice? If you strip away jargon, it is 3 moves repeated. Attend, assess, act. Attention, or prosoche, is the art of noticing impressions as impressions, catching their first shape before they harden into claims about reality. Assessment is choosing whether to assent now, to withhold, or to test. Action is the smallest next step that honors both your values and the facts on the ground. A Stoic does not suppress. A Stoic investigates. The feeling is not an enemy. It is a messenger whose passport you check at the border. I promised you an experiment you could run tonight. It's ordinary and will not trend. Choose someone you feel magnetized to, or if you're already with them, someone whose presence grabs your attention with a mixture of desire and anxiety. Sit and write 2 questions by hand. First, if we never met again after tonight, what precisely would I fear losing, and where inside my own life could I cultivate that quality without them? Second, what have I begun to practice because of them, concrete habits, not feelings, that I would keep even if they left? The first answer shows you the projection, what you're trying to download from them into yourself. The second shows you the actual good you're building. In my experience, when the first list is vague and the second is thin, the relationship is powered more by imagination than by truth. When the first is specific and the second is robust, you have a chance to love a person rather than a picture. Now, let me complicate this in a way the Stoics would endorse. We are not purely rational animals. We are rational animals. Feelings are not to be muted like a radio. They are to be tuned. The sages wrote about good emotions, the eupatheii, well-governed joy, well-governed caution, well-governed wish. The project is not to become an icicle, but to choose the weather under which your judgments are made. If you've ever tried to speak wisdom over your own heartbeat, you know that instructions sound different in the body than they do in a book. So, you train the body too. You don't promise yourself you will not be jealous. You rehearse the view from above, imagining your town at night, all these apartments like points on a grid, each with a little cluster of nervous systems doing their best. You don't promise you won't be possessive. You rehearse premeditation of loss, not to invite it, but to inoculate against shock. You remember that every love you have ever witnessed in a story ends either in parting or in death, and yet the story is worth telling. Premeditation is not pessimism. It is a way to choose how you will behave when the thing you cannot control moves, as it always moves, beyond you. Let's return to practice through another story. The delayed awakening that taught a hard lesson. Mira is a teacher, loved by her students because she turns their panic into plans. In her private life, she is less methodical. She falls hard and often, and each time she calls the man in question a mirror. There is some truth in that. The problem with mirrors is that we see what we expect to see. After one heartbreak too many, Mira decides to slow down, not to deny love, but to give it the dignity of evaluation. She keeps a little card in her wallet with a line she wrote to herself after a late night of tears. Interpret generously. Commit slowly. Generosity prevents needless injury to the other. Slowness prevents needless injury to herself. The next time someone compelling arrives, a paramedic with a laugh like a hand on your back, she allows the admiration and asks the experiment's 2 questions. The first reveals that she admires his steadiness under pressure because she feels scattered when life accelerates. She starts a breathing practice and a timed journaling drill she can complete in 5 minutes. The second reveals that since meeting him, she has started leaving her phone in the kitchen at night and sleeping better. Whether or not they last, she will keep the habit. Months later, when they do part amicably because their schedules are not compatible, She does not call love a lie. She calls it a teacher. She is not numb. She is proportionate. She has trained both her heart and her judgment to share a desk. What do the ancients add beyond these modern-sounding exercises? They add a clear map of control and a relentless interest in character. The dichotomy of control is not an internet quote. It is a dissection of what can and cannot be commanded. Your judgments, your choices, your efforts are yours. Other people's judgments, choices, and efforts are theirs. You can influence, invite, and inspire. You cannot guarantee. If you structure your love on a guarantee that the other will behave according to your script, you have placed your serenity on a lease. When the tenant moves out, you will think fate evicted you. This does not mean cold distance. It means that your promises concern your conduct, not their compliance. I will speak truthfully. I will act kindly. I will remove myself if the conditions degrade my character. That is Stoic love, warm in intention, firm in boundary. This boundary is not merely defensive, it's creative. A stable self makes space for play. The Stoics use the word awakens to describe the natural widening of concern, beginning with one's own constitution and moving outward to family, friends, city, and cosmos. Well-ordered love radiates. It does not grasp. When you are clear that you are not using the other as a prosthetic, you can enjoy their gifts as gifts. You can say without panic, I admire your freedom, and then schedule your own afternoon off, not to mimic them, but to become more human in your own way. You can say, your patience makes me braver, and then choose not to lash out at the barista when your card fails. The smallest actions are where the truth lives. Broad proclamations about soulmates are easier than answering the email you've delayed because you were busy fantasizing about a perfect communicator. All this clarity does not spare you from the flood of limerence that sometimes overtakes the careful. So let's talk about awe. There are moments when someone's presence reorganizes your nervous system. If you've been alive long enough, you know this is not a myth, but a mammal truth. What is a Stoic to do then, when adrenaline and oxytocin and narrative collude? You do what sailors do with wind. You trim your sails, you check your instruments, and you keep one eye on the coastline. You let yourself feel wonder while you continue to test claims. You ask, what do their habits reveal under stress, at the grocery store, with a waiter, in the presence of error? You ask, does my admiration shrink or grow when I see them fail? You ask, does my own character improve in their presence, not because they are policing me, but because I want to be better when I see what better looks like? These are not romantic questions in the greeting card sense. They are loving questions in the truthful sense. If you want a companionship that can outlast a playlist, you ask the questions that build trust. I promised a payoff to the opening claim that most love stories are negotiations between a person and their judgment. Here is how to renegotiate on wiser terms. First, replace the phrase, they make me feel, with I experience. This is not grammar pedantry. It is sovereignty training. They make me feel safe becomes I experience safety in their presence. From there, you can ask, what features contribute to that experience and which can I cultivate independently? Second, replace I need them to with I will. I need them to text back quickly becomes I will state my preference and I will choose my own response if it is not honored. Third, replace forever, with today, again. The only promise you can keep is the one you renew in the present. When two people do that without coercion, love stops being a lottery and becomes a craft. A transformation story may help. Ahmad is in his late 30s, on the far side of a divorce that started with fireworks and ended in ash. For years, he described his ex as the villain and himself as the woke prisoner. But one night, not out of guilt, but out of fatigue, he writes a different inventory. He doesn't minimize what was done to him. He names what he did to himself. He sees how often he outsourced boundaries because he was afraid conflict would prove him unlovable. He decides to become the kind of man who can tolerate small discomforts in the service of big truths. That is a Stoic move, trading immediate relief for long-term alignment. In his next relationship, he practices what the ancients would call appropriate actions. Not rigid rules, but context-sensitive choices, guided by stable values. When his new partner asks for something that rubs his sense of fairness, he doesn't capitulate and then stew. He says kindly, "I can do that today and not tomorrow, and here's why." Then he listens. The relationship does not become perfect. That is not an available option on earth. It becomes more real, and in its reality, complete with tempers and tiredness, it becomes more durable. Ahmad's transformation is not cinematic. It is compositional, small, repeated brushstrokes of truth. Let's give some nuance about the ancient sources versus the stories we tell about them. Marcus Aurelius did not write a dating manual. He wrote notes to himself about maintaining a noble mind in a world where emperors die and plagues happen and court flatterers never stop trying. Seneca wrote letters about anger, grief, and the shortness of life. His life did not always match his advice, which is a useful warning against turning philosophers into saints. Epictetus taught practical freedom to people without social power, reminding them that the only mastery which cannot be seized by tyrants is mastery of assent. When we apply their lenses to love, we are making a creative translation. That is allowed. It simply requires humility. The target is not to be the kind of person who quotes ancient names loudly. The target is to be the kind of person who, in the kitchen at 10 p.m., when the conversation gets hot and unfair, can say gently, "Let's pause and try again," and then keep their own promise. Is all of this too tidy for the real chaos of human feeling? It would be if it weren't tested in loss. Loss is where philosophy either lives or turns out to be costume jewelry. The Stoics were haunted by impermanence and counseled embracing it, not in theatrical displays of detachment, but in quiet readiness. The practice called the view from above is not a trance. It is a change of altitude. You picture your home, then your street, then your city. You picture other people making dinner, breaking up, laughing in a park, crying in a bathroom. You picture a planet that has carried billions of small loves and losses without stopping. You are not made smaller by this image. Your concerns are put into a scale where courage becomes possible. From this vantage, you may discover that what you called fate earlier was a mixture of biology, memory, and habit. And what you call freedom now is the steady willingness to feel everything without lying to yourself about why you feel it. Because honesty is a tonic. Let's revisit the two reasons people seem to fall in love and trim their exaggerations. It's not that every attraction is either a missing piece you're stealing or an archetype you're acting out. Sometimes You simply meet a person whose character fits yours like neighboring gears. No prophecy required. Sometimes you meet a person who invites growth, and the growth happens. Sometimes you misjudge and then correct. A Stoic refuses the melodrama of predestination, not because life is dull, but because responsibility is richer than superstition. The task is not to abolish projection. It is to notice it before you pass laws by it. There is a small drill you can practice during early infatuation that will save you months. When your mind starts narrating in absolutes, always, never, destined, answer it with a softer tense. So far, often, possibly. They always understand me becomes, so far I have felt understood. Now you can test rather than worship. We are meant to be becomes, we are choosing to be repeatedly. Now you can act rather than fantasize. Romance does not die under this. It stops drowning. If at this point you worry that you will think your way out of love, consider the alternative you have likely lived, feeling your way out of yourself. Stoicism is not against feeling. The sages praised a form of joy that is aligned with virtue, a form of affection that strengthens both people's freedom, a form of desire that does not ask you to make offerings at the altar of someone else's volatility. This is why the language of training matters. You do not stumble into this stance. You build it the way you build strength with resistance. You practice disagreeing without contempt. You practice asking for what you prefer and accepting reality without collapse when it declines. You practice telling the truth early so you don't have to tell a more painful truth later. And when you fail, and you will, you practice repair, which is the only ritual that binds without bondage. There is one more loop to close from the opening, the testable claim. Here it is, framed in a way worthy of your time. If you adopt, for a single month, the discipline of naming impressions as impressions and delaying assent until inspection, you will make fewer promises you cannot keep. You will refuse fewer joys that are safe to accept, and you will be less angry at people for not being your inventions. You can measure this. Keep a simple log. Each day, note one moment when you said to yourself, "This is an impression," and what you did next. At the end of the month, count. The numbers won't make you pure. They will make you more awake. When people ask how Stoics date, I think of craftsmen. You don't ask a carpenter whether love is real. You watch the chair they build and how it holds the weight of a body. You don't ask a sailor whether the sea is dangerous. You watch the lines on their hands and the knots that don't slip. Love is not an argument to be won. It is a craft to be learned. The craft begins in attention and proceeds through character. If two people are willing to look and to build, then fate has less to do than you were taught, and luck becomes the space where preparation and mystery shake hands. If your past contains pain, and whose does not, let me end with a form of hope that does not lie. The pain does not disqualify you from wise love. It qualifies you to practice with urgency. The point of philosophy is not to make you superior. It is to make you serviceable to reality. The reality is that other people are not tools, nor gods, nor figments. They are neighbors in the strange task of living. You will misread them sometimes. They will misread you. If you are training, these misreadings will turn from curses into lessons faster. The old texts use the word sympatheia to describe the web of mutual influence that knits us into a world. When you love well, you contribute to that web more than you consume from it. The reward is not a guarantee of happily ever after, The reward is that you become someone who can bear the weight of the ordinary day with grace, and who can face the extraordinary day without lies. There is a next chapter if you care for one. Tonight, you learn to separate impressions from assent, projection from person, appetite from practice. What follows naturally is conflict, the proving ground of love. In the next conversation, we'll explore how a Stoic navigates disagreement without either collapsing or conquering. And we'll test 3 drills that turn friction into understanding. But that is for another evening. For now, close the loop we opened at the start. Ask the 2 questions on paper. See what you have been asking another human to hold for you. Begin to hold it yourself. Then, with hands less burdened by fantasy, reach out again and this time hold a person.